Welcome to the Justin Strawn Podcast. I am your host, Justin Strawn. Glad to be back with you on a Tuesday morning. Happy St. Patrick's Day for all of those out there that celebrate today. I am not typically one of those people, but I am wearing some greens, a specific Yoda shirt that I got specifically for St. Patrick's Day. So maybe I'm celebrating a little bit more than I say I do. But anyway, got a lot to talk about today on the podcast. Mississippi State goes to Arkansas, loses 2 out of 3. We will discuss that, what went right, what went wrong, what could have been done differently. So we will discuss what happened with the baseball team this past weekend when they traveled to Fayetteville. We'll also take a look at the softball team a little bit. We'll talk about how they handled the number 1 Tennessee Volunteers. They also lost 2 out of 3 this weekend, but a little less concerning about that than it is with the baseball team. Not terribly concerning about the baseball team, but nevertheless, I think there's a few more concerns there. Some other things that we'll talk about. I am going to talk about the Oscars. I want to give my thoughts on it. And if I have time, and I might not have time because I'm kind of running short on time, I'm recording a little bit later than I had planned. We'll talk about a couple of the shows that I've been talking about, ETF, St. Louis, and Rooster, both on HBO. So I will hope to talk about all those. But regardless, if you are new to the podcast and you have not liked and subscribed, if you're on YouTube or if you're on one of the podcatcher apps, I would really appreciate it if you went and did so. If you're listening to this on Apple, if you could write a quick, simple review there, that would be awesome. It would help me out a whole lot. If you're following me on social media, or if you're not following me on social media, I could really use your help there, especially on TikTok, YouTube, and those places as well, Facebook, Instagram. Also, I'm posting these things to Twitter, but I got a pretty good following there. I would still love to have you follow me on Twitter, don't get me wrong, but I've got a pretty decent following over on Twitter. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into the topics of the show today. Let's start with Mississippi State. And as always, if you are here just for certain parts of the podcast, you can check the timestamps in the show notes, and they will help guide you to where you want to be. But let's start with Mississippi State baseball team. The Bulldogs traveled to Arkansas. They end up losing 2 out of 3. And overall, I don't think this is too terribly concerning. Mississippi State has never played well in Arkansas. They have not beaten Arkansas. They have not won a series against Arkansas in Fayetteville since 2007. They have not beaten them in a series since 2018, I think is the last time that they actually beat them in a series. So it's been a while since the Bulldogs were able to handle business against the Razorbacks. So like I said, that's not terribly concerning. I guess the more concerning issue is Friday night. You can't necessarily take away too much. The only issue that you had on Friday night is they left 12 men on base, and a few of those were with runners in scoring position. So you had plenty of opportunities to add on to the 4 runs that they scored. So they could have had that plus quite a bit more. I mean, when you start leaving double-digit figures in not runners in scoring position, but runners on base, that's a problem. You need to find ways to get some of those guys in, whether it's 1 out, 2 outs, no outs, doesn't matter. You need to find ways to get those guys in, especially when you end up losing by 1 run, because you can just easily point to that right there. Well, there's the reason why you lost the game, is because you just couldn't get those guys that you got on base. You couldn't get them in. And that was kind of the one thing you weren't expecting to happen with this Bulldog team. The offense is pretty loaded. The offense is pretty stacked. And normally what we've seen so far this year is they've been able to get the job done. The Saturday morning game looked great. I mean, it's hard to really nitpick the Saturday morning game. They end up winning 7-2 this Saturday morning, but the first game on Saturday afternoon. They end up winning game 7-2 against the Razorbacks. Thomas Valenkis looked absolutely incredible. I'll be real interested to see if he doesn't eventually take the number 1 spot. Look, Ryan McPherson is really good. Don't get me wrong. He's probably going to be drafted, and he's going to be on a major league roster at some point in his life, I think. But I think I think Valenkis is the clearly more talented player for the Bulldogs. I don't think it's necessarily a knock on McPherson. I think he's perfectly capable of being the Friday night guy. But when you're going up against the other team's number 1 guy, you really want to have your number 1 guy out there as well. And I really do believe Valenkis is the number 1 guy. It's not to take anything away from McPherson and what he did on Friday night, because he went out, he battled, and he gave the Bulldogs 6 strong innings and kept them in the game. But like I said, I think Valinkas is just a shutdown type pitcher. I mean, he goes out, throws 7 innings of a shutout ball and just looked absolutely dominant. Now, the Razorback offense is not great, but he did what he was supposed to against a not great offense. He completely shut them down. And like I said, I'll be very interested to see if they don't eventually try to figure out some way to move Valinkas into that Friday night role, just simply because you want, like I said, you want your best guy going up against the other team's best guy, and that's typically what happens on Friday night. So I would be very interested to see if they continue to leave the rotation the way it is. It's always hard to make a change, though, simply because of rest and how that stuff works. It makes it really, really difficult to make a change, but you never know. I mean, my guess is Brian O'Connor and Justin Parker are probably just going to leave it the way that it is. But I could be wrong. And like I said, they may, if Valinkas continues to shine the way that he has so far, it's going to be really difficult to make the case. I mean, I guess you could make the case that if your true number 1 guy is going up against the other team's number 2 guy, you have a much better chance of at least making sure you get that win on Saturday. But I don't know. Like I said, there's pros and cons to both. But like I said, I really truly believe Valinkas is the better of the 2 options. Not by much, but I do believe he has just a slight edge over McPherson. And I do hope I'm pronouncing his name correct. One of them is Valencius and one of them is Valinkas. And I think the pitcher is Valinkas, but I could be wrong. The second game on Saturday, that's the one that was frustrating. That's the one that kind of eats at your crawl a bit, because there is a huge case to be made that the Bulldogs could have and should have won that game. They were up 3-0. And as much talk as there has been about the passed ball, I mean, he just missed it. I mean, the second run that comes around, it wasn't in the dirt. It was just a normal pitch, and he just didn't catch it. As much talk as there has been about that, I think, honestly, the bigger issue was, and we won't say this much about Ace Reese, but he didn't come through when the Bulldogs really needed him to come through. That was when, I think it was the third inning when they scored, second or third inning when they scored the only 3 runs they ended up scoring in the game. The Bulldogs are down. They runners on, I think, first and second or second and third. I don't remember what the exact situation was, but they had runners on base. They've already put 3 runs on the board against the Razorbacks, and their starting pitcher, who is a left-hander, was reeling. I mean, he was struggling to locate, and Ace Reese comes to the plate, and this is why you want your superstars. This is when superstars need to be superstars. And unfortunately, this is one of the few times that Ace Reese doesn't come through. He came through big against Tulane last week when the bases were loaded, and he ends up hitting, the grand slam that pulled the Bulldogs within 1 against Tulane. But he doesn't come through here. And, I'm not necessarily hoping that he hits a home run, but if he can just keep the inning going, then you've got a really good chance to just completely break this Arkansas team, because this Arkansas team knows that they don't score runs that easily. They know that. Everybody else knows that. And the more runs you can pile on against them, the more you start to break their will. And you'd done a really good job of that in the first game. And that's kind of starting to carry over into the second game. And if you can just continue that route, I mean, it'd be great if you would have hit a home run. I know there were at least 2 guys on base, and then you extend your lead to 6 runs. But if nothing else, if you can at least get a base hit, get a walk, if you get a base hit, you're scoring at least 1. I don't remember, like I said, I don't remember where the runners were in that situation, but you score at least 1, and so it's 4-0. But you've got a chance to continue just to pile on the runs at that point. And like I said, this is the guy you want up in that situation. And he looked really bad. I mean, he swung at 3 pitches that he had no business swinging at. It was a really poor at bat. We don't normally see those from Ace Reese. Like I said, to me, that was the moment that allowed Arkansas to get back in this, because once he gets out of that inning, the pitcher who had been reeling all of a sudden kind of finds a second gear, and the next inning he comes out and just mows the Bulldogs down. And I think he ended up going like another inning in the third. I don't remember exactly how much further he went, but he found new life. And the Bulldogs were never able to recover from that point on. So like I said, I really truly believe, as much as we talked about the defensive miscues, and there were a few defensive miscues outside of the catching. You had Nunnally who couldn't handle the hit to the outfield, where he could have had a play at the plate that's ended up scoring the tying run. You had that issue. You had another issue, and I don't remember, I guess it was the 8th inning. Yeah, it was the 8th inning, when you got runners at first and second, and the Arkansas Razorbacks perform a double steal, and for whatever reason, I can't remember, Wires is his name. I think Wires is the second baseman's name. He breaks to cover second, and if he just stays where he is, because the throw's probably going to third, if he just stays where he is, it's hit directly to him, and it's an inning double play, and they don't score any runs at that point. So like I said, there were a lot of miscues that happened out on the field. But to me, the biggest moment and the biggest issue was that moment where Ace Reese doesn't come through. I listened to Thunder and Lightning this morning, and Robbie and Brian were talking a lot about changes and if there might be changes that come with this Bulldog team. I'll be very interested to see if they continue to keep the lineup the way that it is. Because right now you have Aiden Teal, who is a left-hander. He leads off, followed by Ace Reese, who is also a left-hander. He bats second. You do have Noah Sullivan batting on the right side. But then in the 4 slot, you've got Reed Stallman, a left-hander. You've got 3 in a row, 3 out of 4 left-handers right there at the top of the lineup. And I'll be very interested to see if they continue, if they don't try to find another way to mix up that lineup. I know it works really well with Aiden Teal. He's a really good leadoff guy, and you want Ace Reese getting as many at-bats as you can. But with having 3 of your top 4 hitters from the left side, you just have to bring a left-hander in. If you need to get in a big moment, if the Bulldogs are trying to rally and the top of the lineup is coming, the other team, all they have to do is bring in a really good, solid left-hander, and it makes life really difficult on the Bulldogs to continue rallies at that point, because like I said, Ace Reese looked really poor in his at-bat against the left-handed starter for Arkansas. I don't remember the guy's name, and he was reeling at that point, but he had being lefty on lefty is a huge disadvantage, and I think that played a huge part in why Ace Reese looked so poor in that one at bat. So I don't know if there's going to be a ton of changes that they make. I think they need to figure out some things with a more permanent lineup. I know they're trying to, Jacob Parker and James Nunnally was kind of the talk on Thunder and Lightning this morning. I could see them eventually making a change there. I don't think they're going to want to, because obviously Coach O'Connor has a lot of trust in Nunnally, but he hasn't really come through so far, so I don't know how much longer they can continue that. But that's probably the biggest area to me where I think they need to make a change, is they've got to figure out a way to change up the lineup just a little bit. That way you're not so heavy with left-handed bats at the top of the lineup. Look, it's great when the other team has a right-handed starter coming out there. It works really, really well. It puts a lot of pressure on that right-handed starter to get through those top 4 guys. But if you get into those late innings, all you have to do at that point is bring in a left-handed reliever, and it almost completely shuts the Bulldogs down. Lefty on lefty is the hardest matchup in all of baseball, because most left-handed batters don't see a ton of left-handed pitchers when they're playing high school ball, or when they're playing, I don't know if you have AAU ball in baseball. I know you do in basketball, obviously, but whatever the equivalent is, you don't have a ton of that when you're a teenager playing, travel. I guess travel league travel ball is the best comparison, but you don't have it when you're playing travel ball. You don't have it when you're playing high school ball. You don't see a ton of left-handed pitchers, because there's just not that many left-handed people in the world in general. And finding one that can pitch is also very, very difficult. So, like I said, it's great when you have a right-handed starter, when you're facing a right-handed starter, because you can really put a lot of pressure on the opposing team. But when you get in those late innings, they'll just go to a left-hander and turn it over to them to try to get them out of a jam. And you're probably going to see quite a bit more of that if the Bulldogs continue to trot out the lineup that they are. Like I said, I don't know if that you can make a whole lot of moves at the top 2, but can you find somebody? Can you maybe move Reed Stallman down a spot or 2 in the lineup and find another right-handed bat that you can put there at the number 4 spot? I don't know. And I think they have changed up some. I think they've had Ryder Woodson hit clean up some as well to try to take care of some of those issues. But it was an issue, at least points, I think, throughout the course of this year. All right. This weekend, they've got Vanderbilt. They got Jackson State tonight. They should win that game easily. But then they've got Vanderbilt coming up this weekend. Vanderbilt has struggled so far. They end up taking 2 out of 3 from LSU, but I don't know what to make of that. LSU has not been real good recently. They were 1-4 the previous week. They end up going, I think, 2-2 with a 1-2 record against Vanderbilt. So they're kind of reeling. Maybe LSU is not quite as good as we thought they were. And maybe Vanderbilt's better than we thought they were, because they did play a really tough schedule from what I understand. I'll be very interested to see what they do this weekend. It's a home series. You need to go out and win 2 out of 3. You've got these next 5 games. You need to beat Jackson State. You need to get at least 2 out of 3. And then you've got Southern Miss returning the home and home that you have scheduled with them in the midweek next week, and you really need to find a way to go out and beat that team, because the one concern that you have if you are a Mississippi State fan at this point is you haven't. The resume, it looks good. You obviously have a really nice record. You've got 4 losses, but the one issue you have is against top 10 opponents, you're now 1-4, and that is a problem. Because if you can't beat the top 10 teams, then your ceiling is pretty much capped probably at just getting to a super regional, and that's about it. And if you can't beat top 10 teams, you're probably just around a 500 team in SEC play. And while 500 will get you probably a hosting spot for a regional, it's not going to get you a guaranteed super regional hosting site. So that's where this could become an issue. They do need to start competing a little bit more against these better teams. They showed that they can do it against Arkansas in that second game, but they're going to have to step up and start beating some of these opponents. Look, they could have beaten. The flip side is you can make a case that they could have won every single one of their games that they lost. So it's not like they're not in these games and they're being just completely blown out, but you've got to finish the job. You've got to go in. If you have a chance to win, you need to do it more so than what they currently are. They've got to get a little bit better about finishing these opponents, because you had opportunities against every single one of these teams to pull out a W, and you've missed 4 out of 5 times. They've got to get better there. We'll see what they can do this weekend against Vanderbilt. I don't know if Vanderbilt was ranked. I didn't see that in the rankings. I know Mississippi State fell to 6. That sounds about right. That's probably about where they are so far. But we'll see what they can do against the Commodores this coming weekend. The softball team looked pretty good this weekend. They lose 2 out of 3, but it was against the number 1 Tennessee Volunteers. They end up going to extras against Tennessee on Friday night. They end up walking off the Volunteers on Saturday, and Sunday it was another 1-0 game. I think, if I remember correctly, they lost by 1, or I don't remember what they lost by, but it was very close. They were right there with Tennessee throughout the entirety of that series. There was a nice crowd for the entire weekend with the baseball team not being there. A lot of people came out and supported the softball team, which is really good to see. I've always said that softball is a fun sport. If you haven't watched it, I would highly recommend giving it a chance, because it is a really fun sport. It's a lot different. It is very similar to baseball, but there's enough differences in it, and just the way that the game is played, that it makes it really entertaining. It can be a really fun family sport if you're looking for something to do with your family and you just happen to be in town. Like I said, I would really recommend, giving this softball team as much support as you can. And the one thing that this softball team can take away this weekend is I don't know if they are still ranked number 12, if what happened to their ranking after their weekend series, but there is a case, you can make a case that this team just kind of needed something that they could believe in themselves in, because they're going to have a lot of other opponents, just like Tennessee, who are going to be top 10 opponents throughout the course of the season, because softball is just a grind in the SEC. And I will be very interested to see if they can learn from this and build upon it. Like I said, they were number 12 coming into this weekend. They've had the best season they've ever had so far, but I've talked about this in the past with the softball team. They have got to figure out a way to break through and become one of the top 16 teams in the country. That way they're not having to go on the road to try to win a regional, because if they can become one of the top 16 teams, then they're hosting for that first weekend in the NCAA tournament. It would be a huge lift for the Bulldogs, because it's a lot harder to go on the road and win a softball regional when you're having to go on the road. So like I said, I hope they can build upon this. I hope that they've gotten some confidence, because they show that they can go step for step with the best team in the country. And like I said, I'm hoping that this is something that they can build on going into the future. I don't have a ton of time left, so I do want to talk about the Oscars real quick. Let's discuss it. I love the Oscars. I think it's one of the few award shows that I enjoy watching. It's one that I've always enjoyed watching. The Oscars are great. Like I said, I love movies. I'm a huge movie fan. I would love more than anything to go see 2 or 3 movies a week. Unfortunately, can't afford that, and 2, don't have time for that. But like I said, I love going to movies. I think it's just a wonderful thing. I think it's a wonderful experience going to the theater and kind of losing yourself for about 2 hours or so, whatever it may be. And the Oscars celebrate, obviously, those achievements. I think for the most part, the Oscars got everything right. I know a lot of people were hoping that Sinners would end up getting Best Picture. Personally, I was a bigger fan of One Battle After Another, but I know I'm in the minority with that in terms of the general public. Sinners was a much bigger hit. It did a much bigger box office, so there was a lot more general public love for Sinners. But like I said, I thought that One Battle After Another was the superior film. But they both those two films really did really well. The problem that Sinners had is Ryan Coogler is a young director. He's got years to go before he's approaching the end of his career. Paul Thomas Anderson is approaching the end of his career. He has never won an Oscar for best director. He's never won a best picture Oscar, and it was very much time for him to finally win one. And this was the moment that he ends up getting it. A lot of people say that One Battle After Another is not his best film. I don't know all of his filmography, so I can't sit there and tell you if I think it is his best film, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was just an absolutely amazing movie. It's the reason why I put it as my number one movie for 2025. Like I said, I thought it was just absolutely incredible. Look, it hits me in the right spots with a father trying to do everything he can to help and save his daughter. That's always going to be right there for me. That's just like the stuff that I just absolutely love. Vampires are not necessarily something that I'm hugely into. I've watched a few more vampire stories recently, but I'm not just really a vampire guy. So Sinners just didn't speak to me as much as One Battle After Another did. But the other Oscars, I think they got right. Obviously, adapted and original screenplays, I think they got perfectly correct. Best Actress, Best Actor awards, I think they got correct as well. Look, the Timothée Chalamet stuff about opera and ballet, I know a lot of people were upset about that. And look, I'll be real honest with you, it kind of upset me a little bit as well, just because my mom was a classically trained opera singer. And so for him to just kind of dismiss opera like that, it's an insult to people who really put their time and their effort into that. And it is not an easy thing to do. Trust me, my mom spent years learning how to perform and perfect her craft. And, it's not the most, it's not something that just the general public just loves to go do, but these people are passionate about what they do, and they will put as much effort into it as anybody else. And for him to kind of just dismiss what they do is not important because, the general public may not go see operas all the time. That's discouraging. Look, like I said, I'm not a huge opera fan myself. When I grew up around it, and I kind of got dragged to rehearsals and practices because my mom was there. I didn't necessarily have the appreciation for it that I should have when I was growing up, but I do have an appreciation for it now. Just because I'm not a fan of it doesn't mean that what they do should just be completely dismissed. But I don't think that had anything to do with the fact that Michael B. Jordan won the Best Actor. The voting had already taken place when those comments were made by Timothée Chalamet. All the votes were already in. So I really believe that Michael B. Jordan's Oscar win is simply because of his performance. And look, it's a really good performance. He ends up having to play two characters at the same time. Honestly, kind of three, because I think it was Stack that ended up getting changed into a vampire. So he has to play that same version of the character as a vampire as well. I think it was very much well deserved. I think the Chalamet, I do feel bad for him because he's put some really great performances out there, and he just keeps coming up short. This isn't this little controversy that he's done with, dismissing opera and ballet. That's not going to help him in the future, but most likely people will have forgotten about it in a year or so. It's obvious that he wants to do roles and be in films that will help him get into the award nomination discussion. I'll be very interested to see if he can do it, if he can get a Oscar nomination coming out of Dune, because Dune Part 3, like, I've not read the first Dune book. I've not read the second Dune book, but from what I understand, the story that they're adapting, Dune Messiah, is going to be a very weird story, and it's going to be very strange. And I'll be very interested to see if he can get a Best Actor nomination out of it. It'll be interesting to watch. Like I said, I don't know. I'm really excited about Dune Part 3. I think it's going to be a great film. Even though my understanding is the book is not nearly as good as the first one, I think Denis Villeneuve can put his own spin on things and can take the material and turn it into something really positive, because he's just a great director. So I'll be interested to see how Chalamet handles that. I'll be interested to see what the Academy and their voters do with his performance in Dune, because I don't know that he's got anything else coming out this year. I may be wrong about that, but we'll see. One other thing I do want to talk about before I have to close up and do my actual job, the World Baseball Classic. I meant to talk about this earlier. The finale is tonight. I've been meaning to talk about this on the podcast for the last couple of times that I've recorded, but I keep forgetting. I love the World Baseball Classic. I think it's one of the more fun events that they do. It's a World Cup style baseball tournament where you have pool play and then you get into single elimination. Obviously, I'm in the United States. I'm wanting the American team to prevail. And coming into this tournament, everybody just assumed that this tournament would come down to one of three teams: the United States, Dominican Republic, and Japan. Japan has been the most dominant team in the World Baseball Classic. Of the 6 that have been played, they have won 3 of them, but they end up getting upset by Venezuela in the semifinal a couple of nights ago. The United States, who came into this tournament, with probably their best lineup that they have ever had. They've got the best buy-in that they've ever had from their major league stars this time around. They get a really, really good lineup to come in and play for them. But then Mark DeRosa, who is the manager for the American team, makes a huge error. And he has said, and MLB.com has said, no, he just misspoke when he said this. But when he was talking on the MLB network show that he does, he said, we've already clinched our spot when they hadn't clinched their spot. And he says he misspoke. Look, it's clear that he thought they were already in. And that's the reason why he said that. And nobody corrected him on that show, because the lineup that he put out against Italy was not his best lineup. It just wasn't. If you look at who all was in the lineup and who all was resting, it wasn't his best lineup. It really wasn't. And the fact that he makes a few moves here in the semifinal by going with Gunnar Henderson over Alex Bregman. Alex Bregman is probably the better player, but Gunnar Henderson was so successful against Luis Severino, and the fact that Gunnar Henderson ends up hitting the home run that basically puts the United States into the final. It's nice to see that Mark DeRosa pulled some strings there and did what he's supposed to. Because if they had gotten eliminated because Mexico had ended up beating Italy and Italy hadn't scored enough runs and they didn't make it into the knockout stage because Mark DeRosa just wasn't aware of the fact that he still had to win one more game to ensure the fact that the United States was going to be in the knockout stage. It would have been an absolute disaster. But like I said, we thought it was those 3 teams, and the Dominican Republic and the United States put on a great game, 2 absolutely stacked lineups. And many people thought the Dominican Republic were the clear favorites coming to this, because as stacked as the United States lineup was, the Dominican Republic has probably even more in their lineup. But it was just a great game, a great pitching matchup in these 2 lineups. I mean, the Dominican Republic was coming into the game averaging 10 runs per game coming into that thing, and the United States pitching staff ends up holding them to just 1 run. I do realize that the very last pitch that was called a strike to end the game was a terrible call, but they don't have ABS at this point for the World Baseball Classic. So my guess is they'll have it next time around. But I'll be very interested to see what happens. The Japan ends up getting upset in the quarterfinal stage by Venezuela. Venezuela's a good team, but I was not expecting them to beat Japan. I was not expecting that at all. Venezuela ends up taking out Italy last night in their semifinal, and that leads us to a final with the United States taking on Venezuela. Be very interested to see how this plays out. I think the United States should win. I think they are the better team. But there is something to be said for a team that is just clicking on all cylinders, a team that is very passionate about this World Baseball Classic. And that's kind of the one thing that you do wonder about the United States team every single year, is just how much does it matter to these guys? These guys are probably more just concerned about, they want to win, obviously, or they wouldn't be there, but they are probably much more concerned about their major league careers. And Venezuela's got a significant number of major league players on their roster as well, mainly Ronald Acuna. That's the first one you think of, but they don't have quite as many as the United States does. So, a lot of these guys are just playing for love of country and trying to do something significant that way. And that's one of the reasons why I think the United States has struggled in this event. But if the United States can win, they can become just the second team to have won multiple World Baseball Classics. As of right now, the only teams that have won it, Japan's won it 3 times, the Dominican Republic's won it once, and the United States has won it once. Venezuela can join their ranks if they win. They could be the 4th country to ever win a World Baseball Classic. Like I said, it's a fun event. I really enjoy it. I love baseball. It's my favorite sport. And it's been nice to kind of have this little segue of the World Baseball Classic as we get ready to open the Major League Baseball season, which I'll start talking more about on March 26th. So, all right, guys, I do need to sign off. I need to get started on my regular job. I appreciate all that you do. And until next time, we'll see you then.